Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary, California. Back in September 1958, Bumpy Johnson was working through the 6th year of his long stretch at Alcatraz Federal Penitentiary. This island lockup in San Francisco Bay was home to the toughest guys in the country. Bumpy was 52 then, locked up for drug charges, and was one of about 300 men stuck on the rock. It was a place where you couldn't escape, and fights were always brewing under the strict rules. Bumpy showed up in 53, and by 58, he was the top dog. He used to run Harlem, managing huge gambling pots and surviving gang wars. He walked tall and quiet, earning nods from everyone, no matter their skin color. To the black inmates, he was a hero. He was the guy who built a kingdom in Harlem and stared down the big Italian mobs. However, not everyone at Alcatraz liked Bumpy Johnson. A giant white inmate named Frank Miller was about to learn a hard lesson. He found out that insulting Bumpy brought pain that no muscles or scary reputation could stop. Based on stories from 20 guys who were there in 58, the event in the cafeteria on November 12th became the biggest tale in Alcatraz history. It wasn't the bloodiest fight ever, but it was the fastest and smartest way to end a week of racist bullying. Frank Miller was 40 years old that fall. He was exactly the type of guy Alcatraz was built for: mean, hateful, and proud of it. Miller was a tower, standing 6 feet 6 and packing 290 pounds of rock-hard muscle. He was in for killing 3 black men during stick-ups in Texas between 55 and 57. Court papers say Miller picked black targets on purpose. He told the judge, "It's not killing if they are pests." He laughed when they sentenced him and swore he'd do it again. Alcatraz got him in 57 because he kept hurting people in other jails. On the rock, Miller kept up his nasty habits, but he was sneaky about it. Thomas Clark, a black inmate there from 57 to 63, said Miller was clever. He didn't just swing at people in front of the bulls. He did small things to make you feel small. He would swipe food off a black guy's plate. He would slam into them in the yard or shower, acting like it was an accident, but hitting like a truck. He whispered nasty names when the guards were too far away to hear. He wanted everyone to know he thought black prisoners belonged in the dirt, not living next to white crooks. By the fall of 58, Miller had been running things for a year. He scared everyone, even the white guys who didn't want to tangle with a giant. The guards let it slide because Miller didn't cause riots, and sadly, some guards agreed with his hateful views. Miller thought he was king. Clark remembers that Miller had killed outside and felt fine about it. He was the biggest guy there and hadn't been punished yet. When Bumpy Johnson got respect, Miller took it personally. He saw this older black gentleman, Bumpy was 52, Miller was 40, getting treated like a boss by everyone. Miller hated it. He couldn't handle a black man having status. So Miller made up his mind to crush Bumpy and show the prison that he was the superior man. The trouble started on a Friday, November 7th, 1958. During lunch in the main cafeteria, witnesses saw Bumpy eating with 3 friends. Miller walked by with his tray. He didn't even stop walking. He just reached out and grabbed Bumpy's chocolate cake. Miller sat at his own table and stuffed the cake in his face while glaring at Bumpy. Bumpy looked at his empty tray, then at Miller, and just went back to his meal. Bumpy's friends wanted to jump up and fight, Clark says. They were ready to brawl. But Bumpy gave a little headshake, telling them to freeze. He kept chewing like nothing happened. At first, the guys thought Bumpy was scared of the giant. Later, they realized Bumpy was just handing Miller enough rope to hang himself. Bumpy was letting Miller feel safe, so he would cross the line, giving Bumpy a reason to finish him off for good. The next bad moment happened on Monday, November 10th, in the shower room. Bumpy was washing up. Miller stomped in, ignored all the open spots, and walked right up to Bumpy. He shoved Bumpy so hard that the older man slipped on the soap and had to grab the wall. "This is my spot, boy," Miller boomed so everyone could hear. "Go find another one. This is for white men." Bumpy stood up slowly, water running down his face. He stared at Miller for a long moment. Then, without a word, Bumpy moved to a different showerhead. Again, the crowd thought Bumpy was folding. Clark said Miller had just put hands on him and used a slur, and Bumpy walked away. But the guys who really knew Bumpy knew exactly what he was planning. He was inflating Miller's ego. He was letting the big man believe Bumpy was soft, an easy mark who could be bullied. That overconfidence was exactly what Bumpy wanted, because it would make Miller sloppy. The third clash happened on Wednesday, November 12th, during the hour of outdoor yard time. Bumpy was strolling along the fence line with two friends when Miller stepped right in their path, blocking the way. "Move it, boy," Miller sneered, his chest puffed out. "I walk in a straight line. You walk around me. That's the rule here. White men go straight. Your kind steps aside." According to the men watching, Bumpy stared at Miller for a split second, then calmly stepped off the paved path and walked around the giant without saying a single word. Miller roared with laughter, shouting at Bumpy's back. "That's right, you know your place. Keep walking around your betters like a good dog." By that Wednesday night, the whole prison was buzzing about the beef between Miller and Bumpy. Some guys thought Bumpy was losing his touch, showing fear. But the old-timers, the ones who knew how prison politics really worked, figured Bumpy was cooking up a plan. "I talked to Bumpy that night in the block," recalls Thomas Clark. "What you got there, boy?" Miller demanded, snatching the book out of Jimmy's hands. "You pretending to read?" Witnesses said Jimmy, who had never been in a fight in his life, tried to be polite. "Please give it back, sir. I was just reading." Miller answered by backhanding Jimmy across the face with the book so hard it knocked the kid off the bench. Then Miller tossed the book into a muddy puddle near the drain. "That's what I think of smart Alex," Miller spat, looming over Jimmy, who was clutching his swelling face. "You aren't smart. You belong in the dirt where I put you." The guards broke it up before Miller could stomp him, but the punishment was a joke. Miller got a stern talking to and lost 1 day of yard time. Jimmy ended up in the medical ward with a busted lip and a shiner. That night, Bumpy sat with his crew in the cell block. Clark, who was there, said Bumpy spoke in a tone that froze everyone's blood. "Tomorrow at lunch, Miller learns a lesson he will take to his grave. I've been patient. I let him think he's safe. I let him think being big makes him a god. But tomorrow, he finds out that muscles don't mean a thing when you're up against a man who uses his brain. Tomorrow, Alcatraz sees what happens when a bully picks the wrong enemy." The main chow hall at Alcatraz held about 250 cons at long rows of tables. Guards stood all around the edges, eyes peeling for trouble. Eating was strict. March in, grab grub, sit down, shut up, eat, march out. 45 minutes, tops. Fights in the mess hall were rare because the guards could see everything, and everyone knew a riot there meant straight to the hole. On Friday, November 14th, 1958, around 12:15 p.m., the line started moving. Bumpy Johnson, dressed in his standard prison blues, got his tray and sat at his usual spot with 3 friends, eating in silence. Frank Miller strolled in 2 minutes later. He got his food, but instead of going to his assigned seat, he beelined for Bumpy's table. He dropped his heavy metal tray onto the table with a loud clang right across from Bumpy and sat in an empty chair. "Well, well," Miller boomed, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Look at the king of Harlem, still eating with his garbage friends. You still think you're a big shot, don't you? You're just another rat in a cage." Witnesses said Bumpy kept chewing, not even flicking his eyes up to look at Miller. This silence drove Miller crazy. He wanted a fight. He wanted fear. "You deaf boy?" Miller leaned over the table, his face turning red. "You think you're too good to answer a white man? Let me tell you something. You are dirt. When I talk, you answer or you pay the price." Miller then twisted around to look for Jimmy Hayes, the kid head slacked the day before. Jimmy was sitting 3 tables away, sporting a nasty black eye. "Hey, crybaby," Miller screamed across the quiet room. "How's that eye? You learn not to read books above your pay grade? Maybe I need to come over there and break the other one." Jimmy looked down at his mashed potatoes, shaking with fear. A few guys at Jimmy's table started to rise, ready to protect the kid, but the guards yelled for everyone to stay down. And then, Bumpy Johnson stood up. According to the 15 men who saw the blood spill, the whole thing started and finished in less than 4 seconds. Bumpy stood up from the bench. As he rose, his right hand dipped to his waistline. In a motion so smooth it was almost invisible, he pulled out a weapon he had tucked against his skin. It was a shiv, a 4-inch piece of metal filed down to a razor-sharp point. Bumpy didn't run. He just closed the 8-foot gap between them in 2 quick steps. Miller saw him coming and tried to stand up, raising his big paws to fight. But he was moving in slow motion compared to the older man. Bumpy's right arm whipped across Miller's face in a horizontal blur. The blade sliced from the left cheekbone all the way to the right jaw. It opened a gash 7 inches long, and blood immediately sprayed out. Miller howled, a terrible sound of shock and agony, and brought his hands up to his face to stop the red flow pouring onto his shirt. But Bumpy wasn't finished. Before the guards could even blow a whistle, and before Miller could defend himself, Bumpy struck again. This time, he slashed upward in a diagonal line. The blade crossed the first wound and went straight into Miller's right eye, slicing through the lid and into the eyeball. Miller toppled backward, crashing over the bench and hitting the cafeteria floor. He lay there in a growing puddle of blood, screaming non-stop, clutching his ruined face as blood streamed through his fingers. The cafeteria went crazy. Guards came running from every corner, blowing whistles and screaming for everyone to hit the deck. Cons scrambled under tables to get out of the way. Within 15 seconds, 5 guards had Bumpy surrounded with weapons drawn, while 2 others tried to help Miller, who was thrashing on the floor. Bumpy dropped the bloody shiv on the tiles. He raised his empty hands to show he was done and let the guards shove him to the ground and cuff him. He didn't fight back. But before they dragged him to the hole, and before the medics could get to Miller, Bumpy said one sentence that echoed in the mess hall and became a prison legend. "You touch that young kid again, or call him one more name, and next time you won't be seeing a doctor, you'll be seeing your maker." Frank Miller survived, but he was broken in every way that mattered. The first cut across his face took over 100 stitches to close, leaving a jagged scar he would wear forever. The second cut cost him his eye. The doctors had to remove it completely, leaving him permanently blind on the right side. He spent 2 weeks in the prison hospital. When he finally came out, he was a different man. He was quiet, timid, and kept his head down. The physical damage was bad, but the mental defeat was worse. Miller thought he was a god because he was huge and mean. Bumpy destroyed that fantasy in 3 seconds. Miller never threatened a black prisoner again. He learned the lesson that all bullies eventually learn. Muscles don't save you from a man with a weapon and the will to use it. Bumpy showed everyone at Alcatraz that 290 pounds of brute force is useless against a man who strikes faster than you can blink. Bumpy Johnson was thrown into solitary confinement while the warden investigated. But the investigation went exactly how Bumpy knew it would. Dozens of witnesses told the truth. They told the guards how Miller had been terrorizing black inmates for weeks, stealing Bumpy's food, shoving him in the showers, and blocking him in the yard. They testified about how Miller had slapped young Jimmy Hayes with a book and knocked him down just the day before. When they asked Bumpy for his side of the story, he kept it simple. "I defended myself and a young man from a dangerous racist who threatened us for a week. I used only enough force to make him stop. I warned him. I told him clearly, if he kept pushing, the price would be higher next time. I don't feel bad about protecting myself. I don't feel bad about protecting Jimmy Hayes. I only regret that I had to get violent, but that was necessary because the guards refused to stop Miller's bullying." After 2 weeks of investigation, the prison bosses made a call that shocked everyone. Bumpy was given 30 days in the hole for carrying a weapon and fighting, but they didn't add a single day to his 15-year sentence. The investigators decided that Bumpy had been pushed too far by Miller's constant abuse, and that the attack, while brutal, made sense given the situation. The warden didn't want to say it out loud, Thomas Clark explains. But they knew Miller had been terrorizing black guys for ages, and the guards just watched. They knew Miller slapped Jimmy the day before. They knew Miller sat at Bumpy's table spouting hate speech. If they hammered Bumpy too hard, they would have to admit they failed to keep the peace. So, they gave to follow the rules, and then quietly shipped Miller off to another prison. That was their way of admitting Miller was the real problem. The events in the Alcatraz cafeteria on November 14, 1958, became an instant myth, not just on the Rock, but in federal lockups all over the country. Cons who got transferred took the tale with them. Guards gossiped about it. Officials put it in files. The story got bigger every time it was told, defining Bumpy Johnson for the rest of his life. The legend focused on a few things. First, the patience. Bumpy took a week of insults without flinching, waiting for Miller to get sloppy. Second, the speed. 2 cuts and young black inmates looked at him like a saint, the man who fought for them when nobody else cared. Even the guards nodded with respect, realizing Bumpy wasn't just a thug, but a strategist who used violence only when he had to. After the Miller beef, nobody touched Bumpy at Alcatraz, Clark says. Nobody stole his cake, nobody bumped him in the showers, nobody called him names. The word was out. Bumpy Johnson might be an old man, but he is more dangerous than the young bucks because he is smarter, calmer, and cuts with surgical aim. That reputation was a shield for his last 4 years on the Rock until he got out in '63. It also shielded the other black prisoners. The racists knew that picking on a black kid might bring Bumpy's wrath down on them, and nobody wanted that smoke. Jimmy Hayes, the 22-year-old kid Miller had slapped, finished his time at Alcatraz and went home in 1962. He told his family that the cafeteria fight changed his life. It taught him about bravery and standing tall. "Mr. Johnson saved my life that day," Jimmy said years later. "Miller was hunting me for weeks. I was small. I couldn't fight a giant. I thought I was going to live in fear for years. But Mr. Johnson ended it. And then Mr. Johnson, a man who barely knew my name and owed me nothing, stood tall and ended the nightmare in a heartbeat. He risked more time in the hole to save me. He used force for me because I was too weak to use it myself. That showed me that there are people who will fight for you when you can't fight for yourself, and that sometimes peace only comes after a little necessary violence." Jimmy Hayes never crossed paths with Bumpy again after they both left Alcatraz, but he kept a yellowed newspaper clipping about Bumpy's death in 1968. When Jimmy passed away in 1999, his family found that clipping tucked in his wallet next to a scribbled note. "He saved me when nobody else cared. He taught me what bravery means. J.H., 1964. Frank Miller was shipped out of Alcatraz to Leavenworth, Kansas in January 1959, just 2 months after the cafeteria brawl. According to the files and the cons who did time with him there, Miller was a different person after meeting Bumpy. He was physically ruined, sporting a giant scar and a blind eye, but his spirit was even more broken. He realized his size and cruelty couldn't save him. Miller finished his time and got out in 1973. He went back to Texas, worked odd jobs, and died in 1995 at the age of 74. Folks in Texas said Miller almost never spoke about prison, but when he did, he would rub that thick scar on his face, a souvenir Bumpy gave him 30 years prior, and say, "I found out the hard way that being big ain't the same as being tough, and being tough ain't the same as being smart. I thought I was the baddest man on the Rock. Turned out I wasn't even in the top 10. Bumpy Johnson walked out of Alcatraz in late 1963 after finishing 10 years of his stretch. He went back to Harlem, took back his throne, and lived until the summer of 1968, when his heart finally gave out at age 62. But the tale of what Bumpy did to Frank Miller in the Chow Hall on November 14, 1958, lived way longer than Bumpy did. The story traveled to every lockup in the country, appeared in books about convict life, and was told by old-timers who wanted to share the legend of how one man stopped a racist bully with 2 swipes of a blade and 1 perfect warning. That fight defined who Bumpy was more than anything else, says Thomas Clark, who stayed friends with Bumpy on the outside. Everyone knew Bumpy was a boss in Harlem. Everyone knew he survived wars, but the Alcatraz thing went deeper. It proved that even at 52, even after years in a cage, Bumpy was the most lethal man in the room because he mixed brains with a total willingness to strike. That mix, patience, smarts, and sudden violence, is what made him a legend. It wasn't the blood, it was the strategy. The line, "Next time you'll see your maker," became one of the most famous quotes in the joint. Inmates everywhere used it to tell enemies that the next step wouldn't be a fight, it would be a funeral. And the legend of the attack itself, 2 slashes in mere seconds, blood on the floor, a giant bully humbled forever, became a warning story. It taught bullies what happens when they pick the wrong victim. It reminded racists that size doesn't make you safe. It proved that the quiet old man in the corner might just be the most dangerous shark in the tank. That was November 14th, 1958. That was the day Frank Miller learned that Bumpy Johnson, past his prime and half his size, could still unleash a violence that would make a triple murderer cry like a baby. That was the cut that became a myth. It was the attack that taught every convict in America that age means nothing if you have the will and the smarts. That was the moment that proved why you never ever disrespect Bumpy Johnson. He will let you hang yourself with your own rope, and then he will cut you so fast and so deep that you'll be bleeding out before you even know the fight has started. And you will wear the map of your mistake on your face until the day you die.